Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Hi, I'll give you a second to get settled. Thank you all for joining us this morning. My name is Myra Mathis. I'm a second-year psychiatry resident and a member of the organizing committee for our inaugural Rebellious Psychiatry Conference. So thank you all for joining us for the conference, as well as the Grand Rounds, which is being held in conjunction with our conference today. So what is Reb Psych? Where did this idea come from, and why are we here? So Rebellious Psychiatry was inspired by a longstanding conference here at the Yale Law School entitled Rebellious Lawyering, which has its roots in this book written by Gerald Lopez. And the idea of Reb Law is to gather together practicing lawyers, law students, and activists and community members to think about lawyering as an act of social justice. And so members of our forensics faculty have presented at this conference, began to think creatively about what this could mean in the field of psychiatry. So what does it mean to have rebellious psychiatry? How can we see our field as a means through which we can advance causes of social justice? So some of the questions that we'd like to address throughout the day and things that we'd like you to consider: how do mental health issues intersect with matters of social justice? How do we grapple with historic and current examples of inequality and justice within our field? And in what ways can the work of mental health professionals be used to promote justice and equality in our society? I'd like to take this time to thank some of the co-sponsors of this event, which include the Law and Psychiatry Division of the Department of Psychiatry, the Connecticut Psychiatry Society, which is a district branch of the American Psychiatric Association, the Department of Psychiatry, and the Program for Recovery and Community Health, as well our colleagues at Perch. Thank you for your assistance. And we also want to acknowledge the Bertram H. Roberts Memorial Fund, which provided funding for this Grand Rounds. We invite you to share your experience on social media using hashtag RebPsych, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, if you so choose. So thank you all for joining us, and I will turn it over to Dr. Rohrbaugh, who will give us a little bit of background on the Roberts Memorial Lecture.
Good morning and welcome to Reb Psych. I'm honored to introduce you to Bertram H. Roberts, the Yale psychiatrist, in whose memory family and friends established the fund that's supporting today's Grand Rounds and contributing to the Reb Psych conference. Dr. Roberts was born in Toronto, Canada, and received his MD from the University of Toronto in 1944. After serving as a medical officer in the Royal Canadian Air Force, he became a teaching fellow in psychiatry at Harvard and a resident at the Boston Psychiatric Hospital. During his time in residency, he also received a master's degree in sociology from Columbia, which was awarded in 1950. And in that same year, Fritz Redlich recruited him to come to the Department of Psychiatry at Yale. And during his time at Yale, he was very active in research with a decidedly rebellious aspect. With a Yale sociologist, Jerome K. Myers, he followed up on the work of Hollingshead and Redlich by comparing structural and other barriers faced by a cohort of mentally ill patients and their families from the lowest socioeconomic class with those from families and patients from the middle class. This research resulted in a highly influential book called Family and Class Dynamics in Mental Illness, which was authored by Dr. Roberts and Dr. Myers. Dr. Roberts died in a boating accident in August of 1955 when he was trapped below deck aiding other passengers in preparation for their rescue. An obituary published in the American Journal of Psychiatry noted that, quote, Dr. Roberts was loved and esteemed for his decency and his sense of social justice, and Dr. Fritz Redlich called him a man of great promise, one of our outstanding young researchers and teachers. Over the last 5 years, I've also had the opportunity to meet with, not sure what's happened. And would you be able to, I've also had the chance to meet with Dr. Roberts' wife, Dr. Frances Roberts, who's also had a very distinguished career promoting mental health. She earned her master's in early childhood development here at Yale in 1946, and then served as public information officer in the Connecticut Department of Mental Health from 1959 to 1975. She's also contributed significantly to social justice by co-founding the National Committee on Mental Health Education and serving a term as its president, and was also the president of the Connecticut Public Health Association. Unfortunately, Mrs. Roberts and her children aren't able to be here with us today, but we're very grateful for the support for this lecture and for the Rebsite conference. Given his interest in the community, I believe Dr. Roberts would be extremely pleased by our choice of Dr. Mindy Fullilove to deliver the Roberts Lecture. And Dr. Stan Mathis, one of our public psychiatry fellows, will introduce Dr. Fullilove.
All right, can everybody hear me okay? Thanks. So today it's my great honor to introduce Dr. Mindy Thompson Fullilove, right there, yes, to speak at the first annual Yale Reb Psych Conference. Dr. Fullilove is a psychiatrist by training who has built an enviable academic career exploring the intuitive but neglected notion that where one lives affects one's health, that sick cities make for sick people. She seeks to understand how the social, cultural, and built environments of our cities and neighborhoods, particularly poor communities and communities of color, have been broken, how this breaking has impacted our health, and how we might go about fixing things. Just last night, Dr. Fullilove told me that she sees herself as strongly centered in a long tradition of social psychiatry. But perhaps it's a sign of our times that her intuitive and traditional ideas strike some of us as polemical or even rebellious. Currently, Dr. Fullilove is professor of urban policy and health at the New School. She co-teaches an urban design course at Parsons. Before that, she was professor of clinical psychiatry and public health at Columbia. She's an honorary member of the American Institute of Architects and was previously that organization's public director. She holds a master's in nutrition and MD from Columbia, and before that an AB in history from Bryn Mawr. Dr. Fullilove has authored over 100 journal articles and 6 books. 2 of her books outline her insights in the psychology of place, and I strongly recommend all of them, but these 2 in particular. The first, Root Shock, explored the unexpected yet catastrophic impact of the so-called urban renewal programs of the 50s and 60s and the neighborhoods they so-called renewed. The second, Urban Alchemy, written a decade later, outlined the 9 elements of urban restoration that she sees as critical to fixing our sorted out cities. But Dr. Fullilove practices what she preaches. To put her ideas into action, she brings to bear her personal expertise, along with her connections with urbanists, architects, and community organizers. Just a small list of her programs, which I'm sure she'll go into, or might go into further in her own presentation. For instance, she co-founded NYC Recovers, an alliance of organizations concerned with the social and emotional recovery of New York after 9/11. She also co-founded the Climb Project, a very interesting one, which sponsors hikes through the disused green spaces of northern Manhattan, promoting awareness, renovation, and reinvestment. And along with other community activists, she co-founded the University of Orange in her hometown of Orange, New Jersey, which is a collective offering free courses in urban culture so that students can become more active in determining the future of their own city. The work Dr. Fullilove has done and continues to do is a source of inspiration for me personally. I want to thank the organizers of the Rebsite Conference for allowing me a chance to meet one of my intellectual heroes. Please help me in warmly welcoming Dr. Mindy Fullilove to speak to us today on urbanism and mental health.
I have to change computers, and they said the fabulous tech would circle back if this eludes me. Her teaching. Let's see. technology. Technology, amazing. So, yeah, great to see old and new friends, and thank you so much for inviting me. I did say when they said it was sort of rebellious psychiatry, but I'm not a rebellious psychiatrist. I'm just anchored into the tradition of social psychiatry. I am, however, actually a psychiatry dropout. Got out of residency, did practice for 4 years, just was infuriated by the mental health system and became an AIDS researcher doing social psychiatry. So anyway, that's my story. I love this quote, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore," which has a surprising source, Jeffrey Lieberman. So I was part of the Department of Psychiatry at Columbia for 26 years before I left this year to go to New School. And it turns out that the New School was founded by people who fled Columbia, so it really is the old school in relationship to the New School. And when I got there, I was like, wait, this is a new school. Because I could tell, because I came from the old school. So the idea that Jeffrey Lieberman, who's the most gracious, button-down person I know, possibly, said, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore," on Medscape to a national audience. And what was he talking about? He was talking about healthcare policy. And what was he basically saying? He was basically saying that the process that we're going through is absolutely sophomoric and doesn't respect the complexity of the issues we're dealing with and the fact that this is about life and death of millions of people. And anything we do that cuts off the healthcare of the most vulnerable affects the health of the whole population of the United States, and that we're not having a serious conversation about the serious issues. He was just trying to express that he was flabbergasted. So I thought it was a wonderful article. It was in yesterday's Medscape. There's actually a video of him giving this, saying what is on his mind, his opinion, and I highly commend it to your attention. But I want to talk a little bit about what I got mad as hell about. And so these are some photos from American cities in the 80s and 90s. When I started doing AIDS research, the question that I was asked to investigate was, why is there excess risk for AIDS among blacks and Hispanics in the United States? And the common answer was that, well, they're all drug addicts and hypersexual, so obviously that's why they have AIDS. Neither of those suppositions was supported by the existing data, nor by any of the data that was revealed subsequently. Rather, it's related to this. That's Harlem. This is the Hill District in Pittsburgh, the neighborhood that August Wilson writes about. And this is downtown Newark, New Jersey. And child is Hermione O carrying clothes home to his mother, and the home is the cardboard shack that you see there. That's downtown Newark, New Jersey. So this made me mad as hell. What had we done to our cities to trash them like this, and then to leave them in this state, and then to blame the people? Well, you have AIDS because you're hypersexual. No, we have AIDS. We have an AIDS epidemic because urban policy trashed our cities across the nation. And so, but as a psychiatrist, Stan was saying, that I became interested in the problem of how does place affect us psychiatrically. But I can guarantee you that as a resident, I never learned anything about it. So this whole idea of, well, this is a city, but what do you do with it? Well, how do you think about it was new to me. Fortunately, my training had included a lot of systems therapy, and George Engel's paper from 1980 from the American Journal of Psychiatry on a biopsychosocial model of mental health really has been like a little quickie Bible for all my years of work. And so we see the person kind of, lots of stuff going on inside, but the person is situated in the family, the community, the culture and the subculture, the society, the nation, and the biosphere. So what is all that stuff has been sort of the first phase of my work, the psychology of place, and then And why does the disturbance way out there make us ill in here? How do we embody that? And then what do we do about it? In the course of, so I've been in the field for 30 years, since 1986, so it's coming up on 31. I think it's past 31. So I've been in the field for 31 years. And what we've documented is what we call serial forced displacement. That is to say, a series of policies created by the federal government, the state governments, and the local governments that displaced people, not once, but numerous times. These policies include segregation and redlining, but also urban renewal, deindustrialization, planned shrinkage, mass incarceration, Hope 6, the foreclosure crisis, and now we're in a new phase of displacement caused by gentrification. These are not natural processes that happen in the city, as people would like to tell themselves when they're in a state of denial of how actively our society actually destroys itself. These are policies that our governments made and enacted, falling most heavily on African Americans, but affecting everybody in the society by constantly disrupting the society and enfeebling it and dividing us. We are currently in a profound national crisis because of this, because we have torn at the very fabric of our society, and we no longer have a sense of solidarity and that we're in this together. We rather feel, I'm in it and I'm against you. We created that as a society. In 1993, after we'd been doing some work in Harlem, we put together what we call a stage-state model of community collapse. The stage-state is an approach to doing qualitative research where you look at the states that people are in various stages of a process. And we thought that the Harlem, where we were working, had not gone from a reasonably functional neighborhood in the 1950s to the chaos that we were seeing in the 1990s in one fell swoop, but rather that it was a process that had happened over time, and that at each stage, collapse had been triggered by different policies. So these are 4: urban renewal, deindustrialization, planned shrinkage, and gentrification. But as each policy triggered upheaval and displacement and destroyed housing, it created a new social state. We tentatively labeled these confusion, disorder, and nonsense. And so this is the model that we've worked from in trying to understand everything about illness. All of my theories, in addition to George Engel, take as a starting point Alexander Layton's work on social integration, by which he means dense networks that make communities able to carry out tasks. He said that we could imagine communities at one end as having integration and at the other end as having disintegration, and that these states of organization, states of social organizations, had profoundly different characteristics. So in disintegration, there were few and weak leaders, small fractured networks, differing sentiments, concern for the self and the I, higher rates of illness and social pathology, and the illnesses were more difficult to manage. In integration, there's a small number of strong leaders, large networks that can pass information, shared sentiments, commitment to the collective good, rates of illness that are comparatively low, and the management is facilitated. So our theory about Harlem was that Harlem had gone from being, on the integrated side, what he called the model, to the collection, through this series of this downward spiral of disintegration over a period of time. Dr. Beverly Watkins looked at this doing her dissertation in history at Columbia University, and looked at Harlem 1950 through 1990, and looked at sort of periods in which these events were taking place, and found, so that we see all of these events, and we noticed that the number of two-parent families crashes in that period of time from 72% to 16%, that the population crashes from 264,000 to 115,000, and labor force participation falls as well. Serial forced displacement and deindustrialization are processes that attack the two pillars of our society. American capitalism is capitalism plus apartheid. And so serial forced displacement is a part of the program of apartheid and attacks the ways in which segregated people are forced to live. And capitalism, through deindustrialization, attack the very foundations of how people make a living. So this is a powerful 1-2 punch that has fallen hardest on the poorest communities, but no community in America is spared. And how do we know that? Because Donald Trump is currently president of the United States of America. Yeah. Start saber rattling with North Korea makes you really scared, right? Just to look at this another way, there's a brilliant paper by Eva Marie Sims looking at childhood in the Hill District. And she, through their stories, divided it into 3 periods. So in the first period, Sims 1, 1930 to 1960, what you see is a coherent, strong community with hundreds of organizations that support collective life and joy and creativity, and where all the adults basically work together to take care of all the children. In this period, Sims 2, 1960 to 1980, urban renewal begins demolishing the lower hill, and her informant said, neighbors were no longer people you shared your life with because you knew their families, their churches, their work, and if they treated their neighbors well over time. Neighbors now were often strangers next door who were tied to the little block and no attachment to its inhabitants. Think about the first part of that sentence. Neighbors were no longer people you shared your life with because you knew their families, their churches, their work, and if they treated their neighbors well over time. That's really the heart of community integration. That's what it's about. Kai Erickson's famous book, Everything in Its Path, about the Buffalo Creek disaster, when he describes the networks that people lived in prior to that great flood, gets at this point. One of his interviewees, he asks, well, what's a neighbor? And the interviewee says, a neighbor is a person, if I go to his house and he's not home, I can open his refrigerator and have a glass of orange juice, because that's my neighbor. This is fundamental to what human life is about. This is fundamental to what keeps us well. There is no health absent this. So by Sims 3, the loss of physical infrastructure and the loss of social infrastructure. So we've come down to single parents trying to raise their children pretty much in isolation. There was a man she interviewed who said, now we have unexpectancy, meaning I go outside my house and I don't know what to expect. So I look to the left, I look to the right, and I hope for the best. So this is a result of urban renewal and other city policies which tear the neighborhoods apart, and then secondly, deindustrialization. This is the 1-2 punch of serial forced displacement and deindustrialization that has hit our cities so hard. And you live in a city that has been disabled by exactly these same forces, so you know what I'm talking about. I had the opportunity to speak to an American Studies class earlier this week, and because they're American Studies and they think about culture, I threw out the question, so what songs would you connect with these periods? And you can think quietly to yourself for a second, what songs would you pick? But this is what they picked. That Stand By Me, those of you who are rock aficionados know, takes inspiration from Psalm 46, verse 2. Therefore, not will we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. In what's going on, the verse is, Mother, mother, there's too many of you crying. Brother, 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 there's far too many of you dying. You know, we've got to find a way to bring some loving here today. And then fuck the police. Fuck the police coming straight from the underground. A young nigger got it bad because I'm brown. And not the other color, so police think they have the authority to kill a minority. Fuck that shit. Because I ain't the one for a punk motherfucker with a badge and not a gun to be beaten on and thrown in jail. That's Sims 1, 2, 3. We have health in Sims 1. We have violence and distrust, apathy and death in Sims 3. So what do we do about this? The ecologists, Roderick Wallace and Deborah Wallace, have argued that there's no magic bullet. So, of course, as physicians and all of what medicine is about, and the reason I'm a dropout of psychiatry, even more than back when I was doing what's called psychiatry, believes there's a magic bullet. There's a drug you can give somebody. There's no magic bullet, not for anything. And what is there? And what they say is, what there is a magic strategy. And magic strategies are multi-system, multi-scale health promotions. And their point is that these fit best with the basic biology of people and offer the most hope for the future. These are interventions that address the large-scale social inequalities and injustices, are sensitive to local culture, and include the voices of all the people. I would say that if you're going to accomplish the goals that you've put forward in RebPsych, you're talking about magic strategies. You're not looking for a magic bullet. This is the big shift in our thinking that we desperately need. Just to take us all back to parasitology, remember that course? And schistosomiasis has a complicated life cycle. So it's a worm that lives in human beings. It passes from human beings through urine and feces into water. Then it lives in snails, and then it goes back into humans. So while the medical strategy would focus on giving drugs to the infected human being, in fact, in the life cycle of this creature, it's in many places. And so just giving drugs to people is a rather impotent strategy. Instead, what you need to do is attack each phase of the life cycle. So you've got to have good sanitation, you've got to kill the snails, and you've got to treat the people who are infected. So this is what they mean by multi-scale, multi-system strategy that fits with human biology. We understand the biology of this. We understand that it's threaded through the whole larger ecosystem. And by understanding its ecology, we can intervene in these multiple places and get rid of schistosomiasis. Absent we do that, we can't get rid of anything except smallpox. How do we get rid of smallpox? I mean, it's sort of a miracle, right? So I want to talk about one magic strategy that has evolved in the course of my work. As Stan mentioned, I co-founded the University of Orange with all of these good people. This is our first graduation class. And Orange, New Jersey is my hometown. I was one of those people that fled. I was like, this is really a stupid provincial place. I'm going to the big city. So I did, went to a big city, swearing never to go back. When I went back in 2007, I was really shocked to find out that my hometown had actually changed a lot, but that it was incredibly important and fascinating. That things I'd read about, things I'd studied in other cities, Tom Hanchett's whole book on sorting out the New South City, a fundamentally important history of American apartheid. You can see the whole thing in Orange, New Jersey. Orange, New Jersey has a park that was designed by the Olmsted brothers. It has a library that was designed by Stanford White. Remember the girl in the red swing, that architect? And that's the library, designed by Stanford White. It has, in the era of pastoral cemeteries where people would go picnic, it has Rosedale Cemetery. So everything that went on in American urbanism, it has one. It had a black ghetto, an Italian ghetto. It had a highway that went through the middle. So it has Hope 6, just everything. Everything you think of in American urbanism, it has deindustrialization included. So in this small city, 2.2 miles, you can walk around and see the history of the American city. We call it everything you want to know about the American city you can see in Orange, New Jersey. It's quite fascinating. And we said, well, since you could learn everything in this city, this is a university of the city. This is the University of Orange. Now, Orange is a majority black city, and it's quite poor. So when you say to people in the area that there's a University of Orange, it doesn't compute. They say there's a university in Orange, with that kind of orange. But yes, there's a university in Orange. Orange is a university. In fact, we've come to believe that it's the most historic city in America. So this is our first graduating class. And as we got started, you may wonder, what do you have to do to graduate you know what it takes to graduate from Yale, but what does it take to graduate from the University of Orange, and could you make it in our university? Ha. We're tough, yes, because we have some requirements that even really smart people can't do. You have to vote in any election for which you're eligible, so anybody can graduate, any kid, you could vote for American Idol, and that counts as voting. Lots of debates about that, but we know that a lot of people are banned from voting for reasons that aren't their fault, so we thought they should have to vote, but vote where you can vote. So you have to vote, you have to have fun with your neighbors, you have to take 2 University of Orange courses, you have to volunteer, and this is the one that catches everybody, and I want you all to raise your hands if you've done this. You have to go to a city meeting. How many people in here have gone to a city meeting in the past year? Not that many, but congratulations to all of you who have. If you want to write to our provost, she'll sign up, trying to get you your diploma. Going to city meetings is a fundamental part of American democracy. How come those of you who haven't been? This is the hardest thing to get people to do. We have to have like a caravan, the last city meeting before graduation, to get everybody there so they can graduate. It's a tough thing. You thought Yale was tough. Getting people to go to a city meeting, that's really tough. But this is the heart of our problem, is it not? That we are not at our city meetings? We'll have no more time not to not be at the city meetings. We have to be at the city meetings. So we have 3 parts of our mission. One is to communicate our brand of urbanism. And to this end, we have invited prominent urbanists whose work we admire greatly, people that we think are addressing what apartheid has done to the American city. So the first was Michel Cantal-Dupart, who came and talked to us about a problem that we knew we had, which was that the highway, Route 280, was cut through the center of the city. And a problem we didn't really relate to, which is that when the railroad tracks were elevated a long, long time ago, they too created a barrier. And so there are a series of tunnels and bridges in the center of the city, basically surrounded by a lot of vacant land. All of those white spaces are vacant land in the center of the city that prevent easy travel from the south to the north. It means that Main Street is basically the main street of the north of Orange, and the south of Orange, which is a little wealthier, has basically seceded and goes shopping in South Orange, the nearby wealthy suburb. So how do we bring the city into wholeness? How do we make that passage easier and delightful? He said one of the things you have to do is light the bridges and tunnels. So we've been working on that. William Morrish, who's a professor at Parsons in the Design and Urban Ecologies program, has helped us work on current policy in New Jersey is for transit-oriented development. This is ironic because we're in a state that doesn't invest in public transit. So we're putting more people around the trains with the idea that they can take the trains to New York City. But you may have heard of the troubles that we're having, had very serious delays and obstructions in Penn Station because of small accidents. And there are 2 tunnels into New York City. And these tunnels are going to collapse within 10 years. And there's no money to fix them. The first thing Chris Christie did when he became governor of New Jersey was cancel the money to create a 3rd tunnel, which would have been finished by next year, and which would have allowed us to take the old tunnels offline in an orderly manner. This is in line with the refusal to invest in infrastructure, which goes throughout, and it's part of what Jeff Lieberman is complaining about, that the infrastructure of mental health doesn't exist. It's been disinvested. So where's the infrastructure for taking care of our patients? It doesn't exist. It's the same with our bridges and tunnels. So this transit-oriented policy is quite ironic. But even more problematic than that is that it overlooks the fact that Orange is a busy city. It's got 30,000 people who are busy. Many are immigrants from other countries, and they're all trying to make a life, and they have different languages and different cultures. There's a lot going on. And we believe in asset-based community development, that you have to know what you have and you have to build on what you have, rather than just trying to bring in some rich people so you get an easy buck. This is a magic bullet, and that's a magic strategy. In a city that's deindustrialized, we are in, I believe, post-deindustrialization confusion, post-industrial confusion. I've argued with planners about this because they say, no, we're out of that, I don't think we are. And I think the election proved I'm right and they're wrong. So how do we imagine the future? This is the fundamental task of all of us, is to imagine a future of work. People say, oh, there's going to be robots, there's not going to be any work, we better have a guaranteed income. But those kinds of things just leap to a conclusion without thinking about, well, what does that mean for people's lives? And why can't we invent work? There's lots to be done. Our 2 tunnels are going to collapse in 10 years. That's a lot of work. Think about the mental health system. If we had the mental health system our patients deserve, that's a lot of work. There's a lot of work to be done. The issue is, are we going to do it and how are we going to do it? So it happens that Thomas Edison's Factory of Invention is right around the corner on Main Street, and therefore we get to go there often, and certainly when we're taking people on tours, we go to Thomas Edison's Factory of Invention. How many of you have ever been there? Stan, when you come visit, we'll go. So after you go to the city meeting, well, that's first. Come to West Orange and see the Factory of Invention. It's a National Historic Site. You can get your National Parks passports stamped. This is good, right? Because you probably have on your bucket list, visit all the national parks. So what is a factory of invention? This is what's amazing. It's a factory of inventions. What you make in the factory are inventions. So if you're Thomas Edison, how do you make a factory of inventions? So he had a fabulous library, sort of, as the national parks people like to say, the Google of its day. And he had a nice couch so he could take a nap. And he would sit and think and get an idea. And then he would rush out to the various places in the factory, like the chemistry lab, where he could say, he was trying to find a local substitute for rubber. He did 1,000 experiments trying to find this. So he could go to the chem lab and do experiments. He could go to the machine shop and say, I have an idea for a light bulb. Can you make a prototype? And they would make a prototype. Or he could go upstairs to where they had recording studios, photography studios, or you could go out to the Black Maria and make a film. That's a factory of invention, because it could go from idea to reality very, very quickly. Everywhere should be a factory of invention, and everybody should be an inventor. And all of your own ideas, wait, I have an idea for how we could do this better. Reb Psych is about that, because we're not about oppressing people and saying your ideas aren't any good. The highest level of development, Maslow says in his hierarchy, is creativity and generativity. And every psychiatrist says that. We say the same thing. So how do we get there? How do we get there where everybody's like, wait, I got an idea. I'm going to rush to the lab and try it out. That, to me, is Reb Psych. The second thing is that in this fabulous, most historic city in the United States, some of you are from New Haven and you are thinking, really? It's New Haven or Boston. But you have to come to Orange and we'll talk about it. So one of the things we do is record the history of Orange. So the first project was this project called Murmur. And Murmur was invented by people in Toronto. Sean McAuliffe in the background is getting ready to put this ear, install this ear. He came down and taught us how to do this. And the project was called Hear About Here. Get it? Hear About Here. So it was collecting stories in the place where they took place. And then you could call the number. So you could call the number on that ear. And it would say, like in a kind of whisper, like in a murmur, this is Murmur, what's the code? And then you would punch in the code and you would hear the story. This didn't work for very long and the technology has zoomed ahead, but we got the high school students that we got to do this project, collected some amazing stories. So Molly Kaufman, who's the provost of the University of Orange, had a fight with her boss who had a list of the people he wanted interviewed for Murmur. So it turns out her boss is a white man, and who do you think was on his list? Well, kind of mucky mucks. The teenagers didn't interview any mucky mucks. They wanted to know things like, they searched for a ghost story. They told the story of the middle school dance. They told the story of the oldest person to be buried from the local funeral home. And they told the story, they found a story of how Martin Luther King Jr. came to Orange 1 week before he died. So those are the stories that they found and that are posted on the internet. Kamani Gibson, who was one of those bright kids that, like me, was headed out of town, fell in love with Orange and fell in love with history and is now doing doctoral research for his dissertation at NYU. He'll be through in about a year. This year, every year we have as part of our urbanism, but this year it's dedicated to storytelling, a placemaking, annual placemaking. This is our 9th annual. When you realize you're having a 9th annual, that's when you're like, wait, we're kind of a real organization. Not just something we made up to have a laugh. So we are launching a website called Hidden Treasures of Orange. And this website is become the repository for all the stories of this most historic city in America. And you can visit it, and it's fabulous. This is a little bit what it looks like. So these are some other young people collecting stories of the city to write a book called Our Orange, Discovery of Our Past. And it's divided into 3 parts. The chasm, which is understanding the history of the American city and all the things that have happened. The prism, which is our ability to, through stories, see the magic of the city, and then have the magic at our disposal for the energy to do what we need to do. And then the archive is where all the stories are. So the third part of our work, we are a free people's university, and our goal is to develop an educational platform. I mentioned South Orange is the wealthy suburb to the south, and so Orange is the school achievement of people in Orange, New Jersey, and blue is the school achievement of people in South Orange. In Orange, the median income is $32,000. In South Orange, it's $112,000. So because education is fundamental to employment in the United States now and for the foreseeable future, but also because education is so important to invention, the more you know, the more tools you have for inventing. This is what we're tackling. And I want to show you this video.
Welcome to Music City. I'm Margot. I am a flute player, composer, professor, and I teach free music classes to adults at the University of Orange.
I'm Doug. I am a composer and I direct the Sonic Explorations program at the Oakwood Avenue Community School.
I'm Ray Sykes. I'm a producer, an MC, and an audio engineer. I created an event called Don't Drop the Mic, which was designed to cultivate the local talent and showcase everything that we have. It features music, it features comedy, it features poetry, it features singing, it features live painting. Orange is full of musical talent across all ages and cultural and ethnic communities, from student to amateur to professional.
Music City, a project of the University of Orange, a free people's urbanism school, connects Orange's musical cultures to bring the city's fractured communities in time and in tune.
Our city is home to many cultures and ethnicities that are disconnected from one another as a result of decades of urban renewal policies, deindustrialization, and disinvestment.
These processes have left our city's residents without political power and vulnerable to development that will displace long-term residents and new immigrant communities alike.
Music City cultivates pride in Orange's musical identity, encouraging social connection and increasing civic engagement.
Bring your cello, cello, cello.
We host concerts, open mic nights, youth programs, and offer free adult ed classes.
1, 2, 3, and Mississippi.
At our Sonic Explorations program, students study violin, drumming, cello, and composition 4 days a week.
Our Concert for Peace celebrated Rosa Parks and featured 92 performers, ranging in age from 4 to 84. We are Music City.
We can create a city where everyone can thrive when we are in time
And in tune.
The weight of the current political crisis is felt everywhere in America. And so part of the feeling in the immediate aftermath was, what do we do? And so colleagues in Boston at the Design Studio for Social Intervention said that one of the things that everyone could do was to establish a social emergency response center where people could gather and they could talk. What did they think the problem was? How did they name it? And where did they want to go next? And so we took this idea and created a social emergency response center over the spring. We dedicated basically our whole spring of programming to the Social Emergency Response Center. And one of the pillars of this has been building solidarity potlucks, which are once a month on Monday night. People bring delicious food and music and poetry and serious conversation about what's going on and how we're going to respond. And out of this has come an effort to make a fair and welcoming city and other kinds of important initiatives to address the broad issue. One of the issues, one of the things that has come out of our work is a project that we called Remembering Jamestown. 2019 will be the 400th anniversary of the arrival of Africans in Jamestown to be sold into bondage. Present at that time were Native Americans. Africans were being brought to work the land that had been taken from the Native Americans. There were white working people, some of them indentured servants. There were women. So all of the issues of inequality were present at that moment in 1619. And so we believe that part of understanding where we're going to go is to really think about these 400 years. Sometimes people say, when you don't know where you're going, you have to remember where you've been. So we are proposing a Remembering Jamestown Week every year for the next 3 years, October 12th to 18th. We invite you to join us. I think it's a good Reb Psych activity. The activity is to read Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. Many of you will have read it, but you may not have read it recently. It is really important to read it again and to read it with friends, and we highly recommend to make timelines of your history. What is the history of mental health as you understand it? What is the history of our care system? What is the history of the illnesses that we diagnose? What are the conflicts we're in? How does that history get added to this big picture that Howard Zinn is talking about? So this is the task. It has to start on October 12th, which is the day, as you know, that Columbus discovered America. Columbus wrote in his journal after the native people swam out to the boats and brought him parrots and flowers. He said, if I had 50 men, I could subjugate them all. And that is very much the spirit of the past 400 years. And we have to know this in order to find a path forward. This painting is by Jorge Tacla, and it's of Aleppo. But if you saw the front page of the Times a couple days ago, it's exactly all the Syrian cities. It's in ruins. This painting is by Ralph Fasanella, famous American painter. This is what a city is supposed to look like. Full of life and energy and people doing things. This is the deep crisis that we are in this moment. What is it that we can bring? I thought this painting by Norman Rockwell was rather perfect. obviously a difficult moment when this doctor has to talk to this family. We don't know what the problem is, but we know it's difficult. And I think that what we are supposed to bring is that is this ability to hold the space. If somebody has a terrible diagnosis, stage 4 cancer disseminated in all their body, and there's no treatments that you're going to give. It doesn't mean you walk away from the bedside, right? It means you sit. We are a world in terrible trouble. And the gift that we can bring is to hold the space so that people can talk about how much fear they have, how much rage they have, how much loss they've been through, what their dreams are. There are things that are going to happen next. And our presence, our ability to sit with the pain and the fear and the anger and the terror and the destruction and say, tell me about it. This is our great gift. This is Rebellious Psychiatry. Thank you. What do you think? How much time do we have? Oh, we have quite a bit of time. Yeah, I think there are microphones. As soon as somebody says I have a loud voice, the people in the back say, use the microphone.
With your chart of disintegration and integration, it seems so indicative of my work setting. The medical assistants at my public health clinic are mostly people of color. When I walked in the day after the election, none of my low-income coworkers were upset. And the educated medical staff all came in upset, and there was this enormous disconnect. And clearly, they felt as life in America was politics as usual, and nobody ever cared about them anyway. And I think a large number of them had not heard. Any suggestions on how to approach this divide?
Yes, read Howard Zinn. I've been teaching a class called 400 Years of Inequality, and we've been reading Howard Zinn 60 pages a week. And by the time you get through the Columbus chapter, you're so ill that you just want to quit. But you have to keep going through the rest of it's a very long book, but you have to keep going through the rest of the ups and downs. And all of us need to think, why did that moment happen like that? Because we can't assume that we know the answer, or that we have the diagnosis, or that we know the next step. We are really calling for, our own experience of reading Howard Zinn has been so powerful. We are calling for a nationwide reading of Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. And there is an abridged version, and there's People's Voices documentary. It so happens that People's Voices is doing a free performance at Lincoln Center on October 12th, which is the start of Remembering Jamestown Week. How serendipitous is that?
Hi, Dr. Foley-Love. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. I have a question around, the data is clear about the state of our nation, and I just wonder if you could speak to, it seems like we do a lot of pleading and using the data to sort of validate that these lives are important, and I'm just wondering, where do you draw courage to continue to do the work that you do and be able to hold that space for others?
Medical school. Really, medical school taught you how to sit, and certainly psychiatry residency did. I don't think it's courage, I think it's training. Did you ever, like, were you ever in a situation where you ran out of the room and went looking for an attending when you were a medical student? Or an intern? I mean, I certainly did. I was like, what? You have what? I was in a urology clinic when I was a medical student doing urology rotation. And a guy said to me, "Doc, I lost my nature." And I was like, "Be right back." I had nothing to say to that. That was not the only time I ran out of the room. So, 8 years of, you gotta go back in the room and face it. And I think it's very important to say, this is not about optimism or pessimism. This is about showing up. Just simplify it. Whatever it is, you gotta show up for it. What are you gonna do? Go hide? Go send the attending? Who's there to send? You're it. So just show up. We are all we have.
I have a question. I think it's a very practical question. I've been engaged in an argument with one of my friends who lives on the West Coast about gentrification. And, you know, we always just sort of hit a stalemate because, you know, I guess I don't really know how to prove the fact that, like, what should you do as a young person, let's say, who's moving to Oakland or moving to San Francisco and you don't have enough money, but you can afford to live in Oakland, but you're displacing, you know, other families who have grown up there. And so I guess it's how, do you have a suggestion on how is someone really engaged in this sort of discussion?
What am I gonna say?
Don't do it.
What? Read Howard Zinn. And people have to understand, sort of the name gentrification makes it sound like there's some privileged people, and certainly the whole discourse about privilege, that there's some privileged people and there's some unprivileged people. And the privileged people are pushing out the unprivileged people. But really what's happening is that we used to have an industrial working class living in the city. We got rid of the industry, so we don't need them anymore. So we're kicking them out. And now we have a service economy and a tech economy, and we're moving them into the city. What are they? Wealthy capitalists, even if they make a lot of money? They're not. They're working slobs like you and me. So, but these divisions, like you're not the gentry and I am the gentry, this is what the whole thing is about, right? And why did they invent racism? Which Howard Zinn explains. They invented racism over a period of time, but significantly after Bacon's Rebellion in 1676, because white indentured servants, black slaves, and small farmers got together and opposed the policies that were coming out of the Virginia ruling class. They said, oh, we can't allow that to happen. We got to divide them. So they made the punishments lighter for the white people than for the black people, and they rigidified the slave codes. So they invented this to divide us, and divided we have fallen. United we stand, divided we fall. Divided we have fallen. So people have to have a new take on this. And somebody's moving into a city where other people are getting pushed out. How do they find the solidarity? You've got to fight against these housing prices, because your friend is only temporarily able to afford the rent, but the rents are not stable. The housing prices are not stable. So after the gentry come the super gentry. So this is not a stable situation. Resources are very hard, because I'm sure you've seen the graphs of the concentration of wealth in the United States over the past 30 years. So when wealth is that concentrated in such a few number of people, there's nothing left for the rest of us. So we're all fighting over the scraps from the table. And so to some extent, this is about how do we build the kind of coalitions that can make a great leap forward. In my class this week, we were discussing Reconstruction. So in Reconstruction, which is sort of the effort to reconstruct the southern states after the Civil War, there's an incredible leap forward, especially between 1867 and 1872. Real expansion of democracy, creation of free education, lots of poor white and black people elected to office, and so it's just exciting and effective. There's an absolutely violent counter-revolution by the southern oligarchs, which is successful, especially when northern troops are withdrawn. But in those 5 years, you see the coalition that won the Civil War making real democratic process. And in our history, there are these shining moments when broad coalitions push forward. The effort by the people who want to have everything is always to push it back. But we have to really understand that when we work together, and united we stand, when we work together, we can make great progress. If we think about the mental health system as needing resources, we're lost. But what about the mental health system and AIDS care and diabetes care? And what about health care in general? And what about people in general? And what about jobs? When we think about all of that together, we can make progress.
I think one of your slides said change in policy is so necessary, and how, for ordinary citizens, how do you think, other than voting and taking part in grassroots open spaces, like you said, how can we influence that? And when one administration sets a policy and then the next administration takes it away, or it's just tough to think on that level, who's not a lawyer or someone who's just working.
I think what's important is if you think about this concept of magic strategies, it's never simply a policy, just as it's never simply a drug. But there's always a policy that's better, and there's often a drug you might like to use. The issue is, what are the collection of projects? In my story about the University of Orange, it's a collection of projects, and our partners are doing many other projects. So it's what are the collections of things? So let's say you have a community mental health center that's badly funded, as most are, but you have an active cultural program. So you have music and dance and singing and theater. The funding goes up or down, the culture doesn't have to vary. And even if the community mental health centers are too stressed to do that, the Department of Psychiatry at Yale can do that for the city. So it's sort of, how do you have, it's multiple things, right? So if you have this conference and it energizes you, and you have it once a year, and you affirm it, and around that you build a culture of health for all the mental health patients, and you advocate for policy, and you do psychoeducation, and you do recruitment of people into the mental health field, all of those kinds of things. Some will be influenced by policy, but others will give you the strength to carry through.
Yeah. Thank you for a wonderful talk. However, I think that talking sort of all of the grassroots, ground-up kind of strategy that you're talking about ignores the role of enlightened elites. I grew up in Baltimore, and there were 4 philanthropists, very wealthy liquor merchant, actually, Johns Hopkins was, who founded, the Pratt Library System, the mental health system, the museum, and I forget whichever was. And I think that reaching and converting or enlisting elites in some of this work, as happened in the 19th century, and I think can happen again, is part of the strategy that's not being discussed, but I don't see how we can get away from it, given the concentration of wealth and resources at the very top. The question is like Major Barbara, Bernard Shaw's play, about, she goes to preach among the plutocrats, because that's really where conversion needs to happen.
I'm not trying to leave anybody out, and if you want to go convert the plutocrats, I'm going to bless you. I don't know them, but I'm not saying somebody shouldn't go.
Thank you for mentioning social psychiatry, because social psychiatry also drew on the work of such people as Jane Addams in Hull House, the Chicago School of Sociology, which studied ghettos and urban things, and developed some of the first mental health survey research projects, as you know. So it seems to me that that you've raised a really important issue in terms of communities and the relationship to who helps them, who uses them, who is in the community, and the distinctions that have to be made to support the kind of community mental health movement in which the mental health centers would have the money to do some of the things, as with the public schools for music. So I was wondering if you address the issue of citizenship, as one of my colleagues has done here, in terms of the recovery of people within cities, as well as for people who are dealing with mental illness.
Our work at the University of Orange is focused on creating the substrate for all health. And others are focused on actual mental health services. But absent, we have some level of social integration, which is what Jane Addams worked so hard to create at Hull House. If we don't have that, we can't have any health. And in fact, we'll kill each other, kill a lot of people. So that's what we're working on. And that's our contribution to creating mental health, is that people should walk out of their door and feel safe. They shouldn't have unexpectancy.
Thanks so much. That was really fabulous. I'm wondering if you could say a bit more about the magic strategy as you understand it applying to mental health. I think complex problems demand holistic solutions on the one hand. On the other, I think you could say it's a neoliberal tendency, maybe even strategy, to place all of the responsibility for problems on the individual, and poverty and housing, now become pathologized. And so I feel like there's a tension to some degree in terms of applying this approach in mental health, to the extent that it's often localizing or placing the responsibility for social and political problems on individuals.
Well, I am the master of my ship. I am the captain of my fate, right? I'm the captain of my ship. I'm the master of my fate. One of those. Mixing metaphors here. I do have some personal responsibility. I'm a person. And Engel's model of these interlocking systems, my personhood is not to be overlooked. And therefore, I do have responsibility. I should act to some degree with awareness of all the systems within which I am embedded. Powers greater than myself exist. But there are powers greater than myself. So think about the wind circling the globe. There are winds circling the globe. And so I got to think about the wind when I go outside. There's an economic system. There's an economic system which moved all the industry to Asia, so people here don't have decent paying jobs. Those are things I cannot control, but I have to live with. So how do I live with that? How do I make choices? So in thinking about mental health from the perspective that Leighton proposes, which is that in a disintegrated society, rates of mental illness will be higher for everybody in the disintegrated society, rich and poor alike. How do we become integrated again? If we become integrated again, then rates of illness will go down across the board. Obviously, as an individual, I can't integrate us. So we have to get together and integrate us. But how can I show up and be part of that? So those are the questions. And Margaret Mead's point, never worry that a small group of people can't change anything. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And here you have a not small group of people coming to a conference called Rebellious Psychiatry, That's pretty astounding. And what you can do is, there are no limits to what a group this size can do. If you start to think a little bigger, if you think about the problems as mental health problems, you will get nowhere. They want to keep you inside your box. So the rebellion is to understand that these are nested systems that go out to the universe. And to understand that mental health is inside all of those systems. And to think, what are the interventions at all those levels of scale that need to be made by this group? You have a lot of really smart people in this room, and you can think that through. If you stay inside your box, you've failed. And if you don't take personal responsibility, you've failed. So, two ends of the problem.
Hi, thank you for your work. You are
Thanks for the
great
way it was.
inspiration, and you sort of answered one of my questions. I have a two-part question. I think an underlying theme I've heard at least a couple of questions is how do you maintain hope in faced with so many barriers? And my sense is through action and through building Orange University and through your Music City. But can you give us some more in the trenches examples of how do you choose where to start? I mean, do you go for the low-hanging fruit, or do you see something and you think that's an opportunity where I start? Can you give any concrete thoughts to where to begin that?
My book, Urban Alchemy, was derived from visits to urbanists in many cities in the United States and abroad. And so the 9 principles of urban restoration are sort of addressing the where do you start or what do you do question. And they're derived from the work that I saw. And it's the work of 10 urbanists that I thought were addressing these problems of apartheid in the American city. And so the place to start, the first element of urban restoration, is called City in Mind. And this relates to what you were asking about mental health. It's like whatever your problem is, the answer is not at that level of scale. You've got to think bigger. It's like when the parents bring the toddler in to the family therapist, and they're like, he has a problem. And it's nice to tell that story to a room full of mental health practitioners. Because when you tell it to regular people, they're like, really? It's not the toddler's problem? It takes a little longer until they don't get the joke. So that's the first step. And that's why in this moment, if we want to understand this moment, we have to think about the 400 years. And if we want to think about it, we can't think about it because none of us knows enough history. What I knew about the colonial period before I started teaching this course, you could have fit in my little tip of my little finger. And now I know about Bacon's Rebellion. I could tell you all kinds of Virginia slave codes of 1705, the Powhatan Wars, the Peacock Wars. I could tell you a ton of stuff. I didn't know that before. Now I know it, and it helps me think about it. Oh, there's a hand over here. If there's
Hold on, I'm
Oh.
over here. Sorry,
Oh.
I got the mic.
You go.
So I'm asking this question because a lot of my work is with people involved in the criminal justice system. And one of the things that you notice is that prisons are often in sort of far-off, non-urban, very rural locations. And I'm just curious, from your point of view as an expert in urbanism, where's the right place to put them, prisons and jails, assuming that we need them?
Let's don't assume we need them. Mass incarceration is part of this pathology. And it arose in parallel with deindustrialization. So deindustrialization is a horror that was visited on our society. Deindustrialization itself, some have argued, comes out of the Cold War, which I was surprised to hear. The way they think it through is that during the Cold War, there was actually militarization in the Soviet Union and in the United States. And all the great engineers and technology people, the science people, went into the military and not in civilian production. And therefore, they didn't keep up with changing technology. and our industries became obsolete and were abandoned and went overseas to build new plants. The reason we won the Cold War was that the Soviet Union's economy collapsed before ours did. But our economy isn't collapsed just as theirs is. So there are quite a number of things that rise, that are correlated with deindustrialization, the loss of manufacturing jobs, among them mass incarceration. But what happened? It's not that you don't have a factory job, so you get put in prison, this sort of storing people there thesis. There's a middle piece, which is this, what I've showed you, social disintegration. So there was, drugs took over as an employer in many poor communities. There was a lot of chaos. The crack epidemic was a time of incredible violence. And so it's in that middle period that prisons grow and people are put in prisons to control the social disintegration. But why did we deindustrialize? Why did we not rebuild our society? Why did we have all these terrible policies? So I know a society doesn't need so many prisons if it's a functional society. So the right thing to do is to build a functional society and have very few prisons. But if you're going to have prisons, they should be in the city so people can visit. And the other thing is we need to be in the prisons. There needs to be a lot of mental health care and a lot of education because the people that end up in prisons are people who were really deprived and mistreated. So, as you know, they have psychiatric illnesses, they were traumatized, they were not well educated, and they end up in prison. So we need to be there strongly and forcefully and taking care of them so when they leave, they are rehabilitated. I don't have a mic, so.
Oh.
I'm pretty loud.
Yeah, but the people in the back are thinking.
I'll try to be loud. I'm wondering, just following up on the prison question, because it does look as though we hang people up there, and then there's a lot of effort for re-entry. But while they're there, it's often a waste of them and their time. And I'm thinking the University of Orange as a university prison might work, a particular prison.
Yes, absolutely.
And we can't change the architecture. It's very clear nobody's going to invest in good architecture other than isolating people. But it wouldn't mean that we have to keep them isolated that way.
You'd never want to say what's going to happen in the future. I mean, did you think Donald Trump would ever be president of the United States? No. I did not think that. Even November 8th at 11 p.m., I think I walked around for quite a few weeks saying, this didn't happen, did it? It didn't happen, it didn't happen. So we don't know the future. And so we have to leave the future to take care of itself. Our business is in what can we do today? And therefore your business today is today. And what is it you can get out of today? What are you trying to do in this moment with each other? This is when you look each other in the eye and you say, yeah, what is rebellious psychiatry? How do we get out of the box? How do we speak for what's in our hearts of our vision of mental health? How do we speak in one voice as providers and consumers? How do we welcome the society to a vision of mental health? These are the things that you're talking about today. And if you're really present and you're really listening and you're really sitting with the pain that's in the room today, then you leave here at the end of the day ready for tomorrow. This is the great Buddhist teaching, right? Stay in the moment. But we don't know what the future holds. But this moment is precious. This is an incredible moment in the history of psychiatry. Yale Department of Psychiatry has a Rebellious Psychiatry conference. Who would have thought? I wouldn't have thought of that either.
Thank you for your talk. I think it was really inspiring. I guess now that we're on the topic of Donald Trump, I had a question about kind of using historical parallels about what previous rebellious medicine looked like. And I'm drawn to a historical precedence of Henry Ingersoll Bowditch, who was a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School in the 1850s. And the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was enacted. And as a medical school professor and the president of the American Medical Association, they would ram through the doors of courthouses to free slaves that were going to be sent back to Georgia, using, in an esteemed position and in a position of authority, he was able to be a social activist and almost vigilante in forming anti-manhunting leagues to kind of kick out slave catchers from Boston and Cambridge. I'm wondering, in the current moment, where there's very tangible threats to undocumented individuals within our communities and individuals of color and other minority groups, how do we transcend some of the limitations of our professional boundaries in being able to actually be rebellious physicians and rebellious psychiatrists and rebellious community members, given the unprecedented times and the threats to other human beings?
So, is this group ready to walk out the door and walk to the courthouse? I don't think you're there yet. Okay. Well, how did in 1850, how'd they get there? I don't know if you've ever read the book Bound for Canaan, but you should, because that will really answer your question. By 1850, people had collectively gotten there. So the Underground Railroad and the fight against slavery and abolitionism is a long fight. And 1850 is pretty close to the end. It's only 13 years from emancipation. And people had really become convinced, certainly in Massachusetts, for the most part, everybody was convinced that slavery was bad. Towards the end of slavery, but before the Civil War, slaves could just walk north because people were against slavery and would help them go. So that's 1850, but we're not in 1850. We're like in 1810. So what'd they do in 1810? That's the real question. So you want to get to 1850, you got to think 1810. Read Bound for Canaan and you'll know what to do next. It's a beautiful book.
We have time for 2 more questions here and here.
Thank you, Dr. Fulilove. I think your last name is fantastic, by the way. I have a very simple question. If you were to develop requirements for a psychiatry residency similar to what you developed to graduate from the University of Orange, what would they be?
Well, the graduation requirements from the University of Orange came out of a community process. So I would say, what do we think they should be? And we would all talk about it. Fundamentally, the thing I learned from psychiatry residency is to honor process everywhere. So I'll try not to overstep my boundaries. I mean, I don't know the answer. I just know it's a great question, and we should talk about it. Maybe throughout the day you'll ask other people, and by the end of the day you'll have a list. I am sure that every psychiatric resident should really understand the biopsychosocial model. And that means that you should walk all over New Haven. You should see this whole city. And you should know its neighborhoods, and you should know where it was fractured, and you should know the histories of serial forced displacement that affected this city. Because then you can think really clearly about those larger boxes within which you're trying to provide good care. Beyond that, I don't know.
Dr. Fulilove, I have a comment, not a question. I am just so happy to see you. I have come to your talks many, many times, and I just want you to know how important you are for someone like me.
Oh, thank you.
So in the African tradition, I just want to give thanks, right? One of the things they say is give respect to your elders and those who come before you. And I sit here and I'm listening to you, and I feel like I am because you are. So just, that's all. That's all. Because of you, I am rebellious, right? I can be my true self. I can think outside of the box, and I can truly take care of my patients and their whole selves. So continue to walk tall. Thank you.
don't walk tall alone. I walk tall with all of you and with everyone. Thank you.
I think we have not heard better closing remarks for this session. So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to the continued discussions throughout the day. For those who are here for Grand Rounds sign-in is just outside of this door. There is still coffee and pastries available if you'd like to grab something. Our next session begins at 10:15. Please check your program books for the location of that session. And you can choose from 3 parallel sessions and decide where you'd like to spend your time. So we look forward to future conversations. Thank you.